Welcome to your personalized deep dive. Today we're diving into the world of cannabis and how it affects our brains. You sent us some really interesting research to unpack. Personal experiences, driving simulations, different cannabis compounds. Wow.
Yeah, it seems like you're really looking for a nuanced understanding of this topic, going way beyond like cannabis is good or cannabis is bad.
For sure. And it seems like every day there's new information coming out about cannabis, both for like medical use and just recreational. So how do we even begin to make sense of all this?
Well, you're absolutely right. The landscape is changing so fast. It's definitely becoming more common and more accepted. But honestly, there's still so much misinformation out there. And I think one of the most important things to remember is that cannabis itself, it isn't just one thing. So we really need to talk about THC, CBD, and how those different compounds factor into the effects we see.
It's kind of like judging all craft beer on just one sip of like an IPA. You've got to try the stouts, the sours, all of them to get
Yeah.
the full picture.
Yeah. I like that analogy.
Speaking of different experiences, you've read through a study about cannabis use and something called subjective cognitive decline, right? What does that even mean?
Yeah. So the study was just published a couple months ago, July 2023, in the journal Preventive Medicine Reports. They used data from this massive survey, the BRFSS, where they asked over 500,000 U.S. adults, 25 and up, about their cannabis use and whether or not they felt like their cognitive abilities, how their brain works, had declined.
Gotcha. So it's all about how people feel their mind is working, not necessarily based on like brain scans or anything super concrete.
Exactly, exactly. It's subjective, just their own perception. And what they found is that people who used cannabis, and this was regardless of whether it was medical or recreational, were more likely to also say that they felt like their thinking skills weren't as sharp.
Interesting. So does that mean like if someone out there is noticing those kinds of changes and they use cannabis, is that like instant proof it's the cannabis?
That's a great question, and I'd say not so fast. This is a perfect example of where the saying correlation doesn't equal causation comes in. It's something you hear a lot in research, but it's really important here. Someone who already thinks cannabis is bad for you might see this and think, see, I told you cannabis is bad for your brain.
Right.
But someone with a more pro-cannabis perspective might say, hold on, maybe there are other factors we're not considering here. Like, what about lifestyle choices that are common among cannabis users? Or even just the stress of living in a world where cannabis is still stigmatized. That could have an impact.
Yeah, it's like how people who drink a lot of coffee might also be, I don't know, more likely to smoke cigarettes. Doesn't mean the coffee is making them smoke.
Exactly. And that's the thing. The study is really interesting, but it raises more questions than it answers. And one thing I thought was really interesting was how often people were actually using cannabis in this study. So they considered you a frequent user if you were using cannabis 6 times a week on average.
6 times a week. Wow, that's some dedication. Makes you wonder if it's more about like how often someone's using it versus just if they use it or not.
Right.
You also dug into a study that used brain scans, which always sounds kind of scary to me, to see if cannabis use actually shrinks your brain. Now, that's a headline I'd click on.
I know, right?
Yeah.
This one was from 2016, published in Clinical Neuropharmacology, and they were looking specifically at the interaction of cannabis use and HIV. So they took MRI scans to measure brain volume in this group of people with HIV, some who used cannabis, some who didn't.
Okay, so they were trying to see the effects of both the cannabis and HIV, how those two interacted and affected the brain.
Exactly. They wanted to know, does using more cannabis link to any changes in the brain? And they did find something. They found that people who use more cannabis tended to have slightly smaller volumes in specific areas of their brain.
Oh, wow. So that means the cannabis was shrinking their brains. Case closed.
Well, again, not so fast. Here's the really interesting part. Those differences in brain volume, they were there from the very beginning, like before the study even started.
Wait, so you're saying the difference in brain volume was already there all along? That's wild.
Right, total plot twist. So what that suggests is that there might be some pre-existing differences between people who use more cannabis and those who don't. Not necessarily that the cannabis itself is causing the shrinkage. Now, I do have to say, this was a pretty small study, only 37 people, so we can't draw any big conclusions from it.
Right.
And it was also just in people with HIV, so we can't say for sure this applies to everyone. But I think it really shows how tricky this kind of research can be.
It's like if someone really loves spicy food, is it because they always have? Or did they start dating a chef who got them into it? It's hard to know what came first.
You got it. There are just so many factors that can affect our brains, and figuring out which one is really at play is tough.
I bet.
Yeah.
And speaking of like real world stuff, Your research stack also had a study about how cannabis affects driving, which I think is something we'd all like a clear answer to.
It's a big one for sure. So the study was published in 2020 in the journal Drug and Alcohol Dependence, and they used a driving simulator, which is great because it means we can actually test this stuff safely, without any risk of real accidents. Simulators let you really isolate just cannabis's effects on things like reaction time and decision making.
So no real fender benders in the name of science. That's good. So what did they find out?
Okay, so they found that cannabis users, even when they hadn't used in at least 12 hours, so they weren't like actively high during the test, still didn't perform as well as the non-users. They were more likely to hit pedestrians in the simulation, miss stop signs, things like that. But, and this is fascinating, there's a really interesting twist to this.
Okay, now I'm on the edge of my seat. What's the twist?
Impulsivity. They actually found that how impulsive someone was naturally played a huge role in how well they did in the simulator. So when they accounted for people's natural tendency to be impulsive, the gap between the cannabis users and non-users almost completely disappeared.
So it's not that cannabis, like, turns you into a reckless driver, but if you're already prone to taking risks, it might just amplify that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to note, this study focused on people who use cannabis pretty heavily, recreationally. So it would be interesting to see how things change if we're talking about different patterns of use or even medical use specifically.
Especially since I'm guessing if you're using cannabis medically, you're kind of hoping for some positive effects, not just like, well, it's less bad than we thought.
Right.
Which leads us perfectly to a study you found all about medical cannabis.
Yeah, this one was interesting. It was a pilot study, so pretty small, published in 2019 in Cannabis and Cannabinoid Research, and it really just gives us a little peek at some interesting possibilities. Basically, they looked at people who were just starting to use cannabis for medical reasons, and then they followed them for 3 months.
Okay, so what'd they find? Did everyone's brains turn into, like, supercomputers?
Not quite, but the results were interesting. After 3 months of using medical cannabis, the participants actually did better on some of the tests they used to measure executive function. Specifically, it seemed like they were able to complete the tasks faster.
So medical cannabis for a sharper, faster brain. That's definitely a headline I can see getting some clicks.
For sure. But we do have to be careful about getting too excited just yet. Like I said, this was a pilot study, so it was very preliminary. Plus, they didn't use a placebo control group, which means it's harder to say for sure if it was actually the cannabis or maybe just the placebo effect.
Right, right.
So to really know for sure, we'd need to see some larger, longer-term studies to back this up.
Makes sense. It's like finding a delicious-looking mushroom in the woods. Better to check with an expert before you go make it a big stew out of it, right?
Exactly. And speaking of looking at the bigger picture, you specifically asked us to focus on the newest research, and you even sent us a systematic review, which is perfect for this kind of deep dive.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned that earlier, a systematic review. Can you remind me what that is again?
Yeah, so basically, it's a way to look at a whole bunch of studies together instead of just one at a time to see what the overall picture looks like. So in this case, they analyzed data from 23 studies all about medical cannabis and how it affects thinking and brain function. This review came out in 2022, published in Frontiers in Pharmacology.
23 studies. Wow. Okay, so what's the verdict? Is medical cannabis like a brain booster?
Well, here's where things get kind of messy. They found, honestly, a real mix of results. So most of the studies showed no major positive or negative effects from using medical cannabis,
Okay.
but there were some outliers.
Outliers meaning give me the good, the bad, and the just plain confusing.
All right, so a few of the studies did find some negative effects, but usually only when people were taking really high doses or right after they'd used it, so basically when they were intoxicated.
Which, I mean, makes sense, right? Hard to think straight when you're high.
Exactly. But then on the flip side, there was actually one study that found that people's brains seemed to work better after they stopped using medical cannabis long term.
Wait, so you're saying their brains worked better when they stopped using cannabis?
Yeah.
That's unexpected.
Right. It really makes you wonder if there could be some kind of lingering effects, good or bad, that we just don't fully understand yet. But overall, I think this review really just highlights what a lot of the research already shows us. It's complicated. It really depends on so many different factors.
This is all feeling very, it depends to me. So for someone listening who's like overwhelmed by all this info, what's the most important thing for them to remember about cannabis and, their brain?
Honestly, I'd say the most important thing is that we need more research and better research. Bigger studies, longer-term studies, studies that really take into account all the different factors at play here, like the specific type of cannabis being used, how often people are using it, other medications they might be taking, even just individual differences in how people respond to cannabis in the first place.
Right, because everyone's different.
Exactly.
It's like trying to judge an entire restaurant based on just one bite of one dish. You need way more data to really get the full picture.
Exactly. And until we have all that data, the best thing we can do is stay informed and make choices that feel right for us based on the evidence we do have.
So where do we even go from here? We've got research that points in all different directions, and there's like everyone and their mother has an anecdote about cannabis. It's a lot.
It really is. It's a hot topic, but the science is still playing catch up. And that's exactly why it's so important to think critically about everything you hear, whether it's your buddy who swears cannabis cured their anxiety, or, your uncle who says it fried his brain. You just got to be discerning.
Way easier said than done, though, right? There's just so much information out there. How can you even know where to start?
Oh, for sure. But you're already doing it, actively seeking out research in different perspectives instead of just going with whatever pops up on your feed. That already puts you ahead of the game.
Well, I'm trying. But even when you are trying to be informed, it can still feel impossible to know what to make of all this. So for someone listening who's maybe feeling that way, what advice would you give them? Like, how do you navigate the world of cannabis in your brain when it feels this complicated?
That's such a good question. I think the most important thing is to pay attention to your own experience. If you're using cannabis and you notice changes in how you think, your memory, your focus, don't just brush it off.
Even if it's subtle, like not everyone's having these big dramatic brain fog moments after using cannabis, right?
Exactly. It might be as small as noticing you need to write things down more often, or you're having a little more trouble remembering details you used to know off the top of your head. Those little changes, they're just as important to pay attention to.
And if you do notice those changes, then what? Do you just have to quit cannabis cold turkey?
Not at all. It's more about checking in with yourself, being really honest about what you're experiencing. And honestly, if you can, talking to a healthcare professional who really understands cannabis and its effects could be really helpful.
Because everyone's different, right? What works for one person might not work for another, and what's no big deal for some people could be a huge problem for someone else.
Yes, exactly. Our bodies and brains, they all react to substances differently. There's no one-size-fits-all answer here.
Man, this whole deep dive has really driven that home for me.
And that's good, because the truth is, when it comes to cannabis and how it affects your brain, the more you know, the more prepared you are to make decisions that are right for you.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This has been an incredible deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise.
My pleasure. Always happy to talk about this stuff. It's such a fascinating, constantly evolving field.
It really is. And for you, dear listener, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of cannabis and cognition. We always encourage you to keep learning, stay curious, and as always, keep those brain cells buzzing.
Until next time.